I never expected a single forgotten document buried in a dusty financial archive to challenge everything I thought I understood about the origins of World War II. Yet the moment I saw it, I felt the ground shift beneath years of accepted history. It revealed a detail so strange, so deeply hidden, that I realized I had stumbled onto a truth almost no mainstream narrative ever mentions. This discovery forced me to rethink the rise of Nazi Germany, because it exposed a hidden financial mechanism that rebuilt a war machine no broken nation should have been able to create.
In every great event, there's always a secret they never told you, hidden behind old maps, silent wars, and forgotten names. The truth is buried, waiting to be revealed. History isn't always what you were taught. Many secrets were hidden, erased, or rewritten. Behind every page, there's a truth waiting to be uncovered. Listen carefully. Welcome to Confidential Facts. Here, hidden history is revealed. Forgotten battles, secret alliances, and untold stories.
Hitler rebuilt a war machine that Germany could not afford at all, and when I first traced the money behind that army, I felt as if I had stumbled into a secret room that no one had bothered to open because the scale of the deception stunned me, and I realized I was looking at a hidden fact that I had never seen clearly explained before. A fact you need to understand if you want to know how a bankrupt country turned itself into the most heavily armed state in Europe in just a few years. In 1933, Germany did not look like a future military giant. The country struggled with crushing unemployment. Factories stood idle. Banks were weak. The government had little real room to spend. The world still remembered the chaos of hyperinflation in the early 1920s, when savings turned to dust. On paper, this was not a state that could pour resources into tanks, aircraft, and a massive new army. Yet, that is exactly what happened. By 1939, foreign observers watched in disbelief as German armored units rolled across borders, as bombers lifted off from well-equipped airfields, and as soldiers marched in new uniforms with modern weapons. It looked like a miracle of national recovery. For a long time, I accepted that description. I thought Germany had simply managed its economy better, or that strict controls and discipline explained the sudden rise in armaments. Only when I went deeper into internal documents, finance schemes, and industrial agreements did I see the hidden skeleton supporting this impressive body. It was not a miracle of strength. It was a web of secret credit, delayed payment, forced sacrifices, and planned looting of future territories. At the center of it stood a method so simple yet so powerful that it forced me to rethink everything I thought I knew about rearmament. This method allowed Hitler to arm without money, to build without visible budget, and to hide the true cost from his own population. When I first read about it in detail, I did not quite believe that an entire war machine could rest on such fragile foundations. But the more sources I checked, the clearer it became. Germany had created a shadow financial engine that pumped weapons into existence while leaving the official economy looking healthier than it really was. The regime then wrapped this engine in propaganda about national rebirth. Ordinary citizens saw new jobs, full factories, and marching columns. They did not see the promissory notes and hidden debts that piled up behind the scenes. That is the reason I say this is a hidden fact you should understand, because once you see how the money flowed, you begin to understand why Germany rushed into war and why its leaders always talked about expansion, space, and resources. They did not just want war. In many ways, they needed war, because only conquest could pay for the weapons they had already ordered. The key tool that unlocked this impossible armament program carried an obscure name that almost never appears in popular discussions, yet it shaped the fate of Europe. These were the MEFO bills. On the surface, they looked like simple credit notes. In reality, they acted as a second secret budget for The idea came from Joel Marschakt, a skilled banker and economist whom Hitler brought into the government to repair the economy and fund his ambitions. Germany did not have the cash to pay arms manufacturers. If the regime spent openly on weapons, the official budget would explode and foreign creditors would panic. So Schacht created a front company called MEFO, short for Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft. This company did almost nothing in a physical sense. It existed mainly on paper. When the government wanted tanks, artillery, trucks, or aircraft, it did not pay the firms with regular state money. Instead, it issued MEFO bills. These bills were promises to pay later with interest. The state guaranteed them, so firms trusted them. Factories accepted the bills as if they were cash. They used them to secure credit from banks. They paid wages. They expanded plants. On the surface, the economy looked busy and successful. Yet most of the activity ran on delayed payment. The official state budget remained lower than it should have been because the real cost of rearmament sat hidden behind MEFO paper. When I first saw the numbers, I realized how large this shadow budget became. It allowed Hitler to push ahead with massive orders long before Germany had the resources to pay for them. It also chained the industrialists to the regime. The more MEFO bills they held, the more they depended on Hitler staying in power and finding a way to make good on his promises. Inside Germany, very few people understood what was happening. Workers simply knew that factories hired again. Engineers saw new contracts. Train lines carried steel, coal, and machinery across the country. Propaganda films talked about national recovery and strength. Nobody explained that a large part of this boom rested on pieces of paper that would come due in a few years. With no clear plan for repayment, except more pressure, more controls, and eventually more plunder. When I read internal memos, I found hints of worry even among Nazi officials. Some understood that the MEFO system could only run for a limited time. At some point, bills needed to be redeemed. That meant either open inflation, default, or a new source of wealth that lay outside Germany's existing economy. Hitler did not want to admit any weakness. Instead, he used the breathing space given by MEFO to move faster, to build more, and to tighten control over every sector of the economy. While the public still believed that the country had simply found its strength again. The MEFO system solved the problem of how to start rearmament without money. It did not solve the deeper problem of where to find the actual resources. Weapons require steel, copper, aluminum, oil, rubber, and food for workers and soldiers. Germany lacked many of these in sufficient amount. This is where the second layer of the hidden system emerged. The regime imposed strict controls on the economy. It blocked imports that did not fit its goals. It limited consumer goods. It redirected materials into priority sectors. Ordinary Germans felt this as shortages and rationing even before the war began. They had fewer choices in shops. Prices did not always reflect true scarcity because the state manipulated them. The regime argued that this was sacrifice for national greatness. People believed it, especially as they saw unemployment fall and industry revive, but behind the scenes, officials like Gring and others used these controls to squeeze every possible ton of metal, fuel, and chemicals into armament projects. At the same time, Germany signed complex trade agreements with other countries, especially in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. These clearing agreements often bypassed cash. Germany paid with manufactured goods or promises that would be settled later. It received food, oil, and raw materials in return. This gave the appearance of balanced trade, yet in practice, it created chains of dependence. Farmers in those countries became tied to German markets. Their governments faced pressure to comply with Berlin. Once again, the system looked stable only as long as nobody challenged it. What struck me most in the documents was how often German planners worried about shortages. They knew fuel stocks would not last in a long war. They knew aluminum supplies, limited aircraft production. They knew synthetic rubber and fuel programs could not fully replace natural sources. Yet instead of reducing their ambitions, they accepted this fragility and built strategy around it. The German state also relied heavily on public works and show projects like the famous highways, which gave people visible signs of progress. While the real long-term resources went into armament, workers toiled longer hours. Farmers faced tighter rules. Small businesses saw their freedom shrink. The regime traded future stability for present power. Foreign observers saw the new roads, the military parades, and the revived factories. Many concluded that Germany had solved its economic crisis. From inside, if you looked at the right files, you saw something different. You saw an economy stretched to its limits, using every tool of control, propaganda, and foreign bargaining to feed an armament drive that ran faster than its real capacity. This gap between appearance and reality is what makes this story a hidden fact worth your attention, because it explains why German leaders constantly talked about the need for more space, more resources, and more living room. They had built a machine that demanded constant feeding. At a certain point, the bills had to be paid. MEFO notes would come due. Creditors would want real money. Imports needed settlement. Domestic shortages grew more serious. Hitler's answer did not involve slowing down. He decided that conquered territories would pay for the weapons already built and for the new ones still in production. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, it did not just gain land and fellow Germans. It gained the Austrian Central Bank's gold reserves. It gained industries and railways. It gained access to new taxpayers and workers. The same pattern emerged in Czechoslovakia. That country possessed well-developed arms factories, including those at Koda, and important raw materials. Once under German control, those factories became part of the German war machine. Their output helped arm the Wehrmacht for future campaigns. What looked like ideological expansion also functioned as economic rescue. Internal documents show officials calculating the value of seized assets from foreign currency to factory equipment. Looting became policy. The state stripped occupied lands of food, coal, metals, and machinery. It directed these flows back into the German system to keep production running. Even early blitzkrieg campaigns in Poland and in the West followed this logic. By striking fast, Germany hoped to defeat enemies before its fragile reserves ran out. Quick victories would bring new resources into the system. Longer wars would expose its weakness. This helps explain why Hitler pushed his generals toward rapid, daring operations instead of cautious buildup. He knew, even if he rarely admitted it, that time was not on his side. Oil was a constant concern. Germany lacked large domestic oil fields. Synthetic fuel plants covered part of the gap, but not all. Import routes were vulnerable. War diaries from the Luftwaffe and the Navy show constant juggling of fuel allocations. Training hours were cut. Units received less than ideal amounts of gasoline. Yet production of tanks, trucks, and aircraft continued because the regime believed that new conquests, especially in the East, would solve the problem. The Soviet Union's oil and grain, they thought, would become German property. Armies would live off the land. Industry would feed on captured resources. It is here that the hidden financial and economic story meets the brutal reality of war and occupation. The plunder of conquered territories led to starvation in some regions, forced labor for millions, and a system of exploitation that treated entire populations as fuel for the German machine. When I studied these links, I understood that rearmament was not just a technical story about budgets and credit. It was a path that made large-scale crime almost unavoidable. Once you build a war machine you cannot truly afford, you become tempted to use it to steal what you need. Once you tie your financial survival to conquest, peace becomes dangerous. For Hitler and his circle, the war was not just about ideas or borders. It was also about filling the hole they had dug inside the German economy. By the early years of the Second World War, Germany looked like a giant in uniform. Its armies had crushed Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, and France. Its flags flew over capitals that had once been symbols of resistance. Many people, both inside and outside Europe, thought Germany had become an unstoppable power. Yet if you returned to the numbers beneath the surface, you saw a different picture. The same fragile base that had financed rearmament still existed. The economy still lacked secure access to enough oil, metals, and food for a long global conflict. The MEFO bills and other debts still haunted the system, now buried under the noise of war. The state had gained new resources from conquest, but it had also taken on the cost of occupying and controlling huge territories. It needed to feed and supply more soldiers. It needed to maintain longer supply lines. It needed to fight on multiple fronts. When the war turned from quick campaigns to prolonged struggles, especially against the Soviet Union, and later the United States and Britain together, the gap between German ambition and German capacity grew wider every month. Production could not match losses. Fuel shortages became critical. Trains lacked coal. Bombing exposed weaknesses in industry. The miracle of rearmament, which had looked so impressive in 1939, revealed itself as a structure built on debt, fear, and the hope that each new conquest would solve the problems created by the last one. That is why I say, this is one of the most important hidden facts you should understand about Hitler's war machine. It was not simply a story of ruthless efficiency or disciplined planning. It was a story of a leadership that chose to gamble its economy on war because it had already mortgaged the future. It used secret credit to build weapons it could not truly pay for. It used propaganda to hide sacrifices from its own people. It used foreign deals and clearing arrangements to stretch scarce resources. It then used conquest and plunder to fill the growing gaps. In the end, this structure collapsed under its own weight, but only after causing destruction on a scale that still shapes our world. If you want to see how these pieces fit together in detail, with maps, archived documents, and concrete examples of how each financial decision led to a military step and then to a human cost, I invite you to watch the full YouTube video on this topic. Stay with the video until the end. You will see how Hitler rebuilt a war machine Germany could not afford, how that machine dragged Europe into catastrophe, and how understanding this hidden economic story can change the way you look at every decision that led into the Second World War.